my topic is how farmers learn. So it's about effective extension to drive practice change. And firstly, I'd like to thank Nuffield for this great opportunity. It really has been a fantastic opportunity, the opportunity of a lifetime, but also to GRDC, who are my sponsors. And I know they've been very strong sponsors of Nuffield. So a little bit about myself. I'm on the south coast of Western Australia. I'm farming down there. It's a grain property. We're putting in about 4,500 hectares of crop, which is cereals, pulses and oilseeds. And I suppose we try and use best practice with no-till, controlled traffic and integrated weed management. My passion has always been about learning and adoption of new ideas, but I don't consider myself to be an innovator. I'm just an early adopter because I believe that the explorers get the arrows and the settlers get the land. So I'm more than happy to be first to be second. Also, the other person I'd really like to thank is Adam, on the left over here. He had to step up. He's been working with me for a year or two, unlike this thing, which doesn't seem to be working. And he's been absolutely fantastic. I had 4 months away last year. He wanted to become a farm manager and he really stepped up to the plate and did a magnificent job. And I suppose that was one of the learnings out of Nuffield, that you are actually, I've got to get this right, you are dispensable. You don't have to be there all the time. It was a really good learning. So why this topic? Well, Esperance was settled in the 1960s, as Colin said earlier. It's fairly new land country, and so we had to learn how to farm that country. And there was very good collaborative learning. As you can see, this is from the 1960s at a field day in Esperance at the research station. So there's this real quest for knowledge. So we saw huge increases in productivity on the farms, and since returning back from studying, I've actually been heavily involved in a lot of industry groups and organising field days and all the kind of stuff I'm sure we all do in our own communities. And it was probably through some of that, and was involved with a program called Bridging the Yield Gap, where we were trying to get an extra 2 million tonnes out of the high rainfall zones in Western Australia. And I thought, well, hang on, we've got all these great ideas, but are we using the right methodology to try and get that message out there, to try and get some practice change? And also involved with the GRDC project, where a light bulb went off, and I thought, hang on, we've really got to look at how we go about extension. Because we were seeing productivity increases until the 1980s of about, depending on which figures you use, about 1.6 to 1.9% per annum. But since then that's dropped off, and that's probably coincided with a decrease in government expenditure on public research and development. So also the change of extension is facing, the face of extension is changing. And where we used to see a lot of state government ag departments being involved in that, they've moved out from it. So now we're seeing more grower groups, we're seeing more private agronomy and different players in the industry. So I'd always been frustrated that I'd see these ideas that weren't being adopted, great innovations that weren't being taken up, and I was sort of thinking, are we leaving, as a farming organisation or farming community, are we leaving money on the table through this lack of adoption? So my question was, is it the message or is it the delivery of that message? So after deciding on the corny title of How Farmers Learn, I started to realise what a big and nebulous topic it was and wondered why I picked it. But so the things I wanted to look at were probably, what were the what drives people to take up change, or what are the impediments to change? Why do some people do it and others don't? So looking at the whole raft of things behind that. Also the effectiveness of all the different extension techniques we've got. I mean, I think now we're bombarded with information, whether it be through newsletters, whether it be through social media, whether it be through industry organisations, whether it be in rural media, and look at some of the different models worldwide and how they work. And then lastly, how to facilitate that change. So what actually works and what's actually required to facilitate that. So the next thing was where I went. Where was I going to go off to? Well, firstly, I went down to New Zealand. The reason I wanted to go to New Zealand was there's been such a huge expansion of the dairy industry, and people have come from a non-dairy background and spent a lot of money getting into dairy platform. So how did they get upskilled so quickly? Also look at the kiwi fruit industry in New Zealand, which is Esperance, and the way that they handled a big disease crisis back a few years ago, where they had to try and get a lot of information out to farmers quickly to get practice change. As a side to that, they actually ended up using psychologists to actually work out the farmer psychology to how to get messages out to them. Next was Argentina, where I visited a group called CREA, which is a collaborative farming group which works on research, extension, and also a lot of benchmarking. And then to the US, where I looked at the land-grant university systems, also the philanthropic research foundations they've got there, and as well, more specifically, I wanted to look at how large multinationals engage with farmers. From there it was on to the UK, where it was more emphasis once again on peer learning and how they go about using discussion groups, monitor farms, and a whole raft of things where they're bringing farmers together. Because one of the things that I did learn was that farmers learn best from farmers, which seems pretty simple, but it's how we then facilitate that. So the impressions that I got was that everyone seems to be grappling with extension and getting that message out there effectively and getting full value for R&D. And maybe some of that's due to these funding cutbacks as well, and because, as Colin was saying earlier, that relevance of ag in the general society, we probably don't have the electoral power we once had. So it's been easy to pull back funding to the agricultural industry. So we're seeing private RD&E filling some of those gaps, but the question that I've got is if there's no commercial advantage or no commercial reason for private organisations to be undertaking a lot of that research, who's actually going to, are we going to end up with some market failure, some areas not being covered? One of the other interesting things I did, one of the most obvious things, was there's a huge information overload. So I akined it to like trying to drink water from a fire hose, trying to manage all the information that's coming to us. But the overall impression I got was that there's a really strong trend to collaborative learning and benchmarking. So I suppose there was two basic models of research and extension, one being the top-down, which is probably more science-driven, and the other being bottom-up. So just quickly on the top-down model, it's probably more what we have here in Australia. It's probably been traditionally quite top-down. There is I'll talk on the grains industry, which I know. I know that there's a change to move away from that with GRDC implementing our regional cropping solutions networks and using their panel system. But it's probably a supply-driven approach where the scientist is first, they decide on their priorities, and then they try and push that down the line down to the farming community. So I actually sometimes question how well targeted that would be, because there's not the close interaction with the farmer, which is the end user of all that information. So we also probably don't get very good two-way flows. So the relevancy of that work some of the time mightn't be quite right. Also relying on dissemination through probably the old traditional channels that we used to use, the old extension methodologies. And I think that it also probably follows behind farmers and validates the innovation that happens at a farm level rather than actually leading innovation. Now, probably a very strong example of that top-down method would have been the land-grant university systems, and also I went to the Robert Noble Foundation, which is a philanthropic organisation which had to spend $600 million a year as part of their bequest or whatever they had on research. It was huge resourcing. And they had the capacity to take 3 and 4 people out to consult with one farmer, so that was very, very top-down. I question the amount of ownership of the information and change by the farmer in that model. But one of the interesting ones I did see, and I wanted to have a look at what Monsanto were doing. Now Monsanto, you all know, is a chemical company, but they're probably more a bioscience company, heavily involved in seeds. There was a company called the Climate Corporation, you can see over here on the right, and this was set up by some Google executives. And what they were looking at was, they got all the publicly available weather data from the United States, which is, it's very vast, and they were using that initially to try and offer insurance. If you were holding an outdoor event, you could take insurance against bad weather, inclement weather, and get it. So they did this, and then they realised that there was all this publicly available characterisation of soil, so if they could combine the two of them, they had something pretty powerful. So they use all algorithms and fancy stuff and lots of data. And so they did this, and then Monsanto thought, hang on, there's some real value in this for us. So they went and purchased Climate Corporation for $1 billion. And so what this has enabled them to do is go to farmers and say, righto, you can sign up to our field scripts program, where the farmer comes along, he says the field that he wants to work in, and through their soil characterisation data, their weather data, they'll actually say, well, you could use this variety of our corn, or whatever it may be they're sowing. Actually, you can have 2 varieties of corn in the same paddock, because if the lay of the land is different, we recommend one hybrid on this side and another on the other, and they've now invented the seed you can do all of that with in one pass. but they'll advise on the variety, the sowing rates. They'll give you variable rate prescription maps to actually undertake this work. And then also, it's all about the data science and technology. Then they'll also advise you on the nitrogen rates and the timing of your nitrogen, and then the soil conditions in your paddocks, and then also using biomass imagery. They're then recommending areas you go and check for, whether it be disease or pests or weeds, right through to timing of harvest and expected yields. So I figure this is a very top-down, narrow sort of an approach, and I actually wonder what's going to happen to understanding of your farming system and also to innovation at a farmer level under that sort of a system. But the one that I was more interested in was probably this bottom-up learning, which we could say it's new, but maybe what's old is new again. So it's more demand-driven, it's more bottom-up. It's a farmer first, so we've got better two-way flows of information. I think this is probably where things such as grower groups come in. It utilises that peer learning. Farmers love nothing more than talking to other farmers about what's going on and also the visual side of it. Facilitates that information sharing, and I think by interacting grower groups, researchers and farmers together, we get more relevant and well-ground truth research. And also it supports innovation rather than actually coming along validating it later. So some of the groups that I went and saw were Zespri, which I'd spoken about earlier, Dairy NZ, incredibly well-resourced organisation, very strong on their extension focus. Also I noticed that AgResearch in New Zealand had a very, very strong social research division looking at adoption and how people go about, how you go about getting messages out there. And then also Chuggas, which is the Irish organisation, the equivalent of their ag department, which has a very large dairy discussion group network. Homegrown Cereals Authority in the UK, which is now setting up, they've been grappling with extension as well, so they're going back to actually using a monitor farm system and benchmarking growers. And then the South Island Dairy Development Centre, which run a demonstration farm, which is benchmarked against all other growers. But one of the really interesting ones I went and saw was CREA, which was this Argentinian organisation. You can see two people there in the middle. The guy on the left was a guy called Ricky Negri. His grandfather bought CREA to Argentina in the 1950s. And this started there. They've got 190 groups with about 12 farmers in each group. And it's a collaborative group where they do research together, they're doing benchmarking, they're doing problem solving together, and and so it's a really good information sharing system. They started in Argentina, they're now in most of South America, and due to their success, they've actually just been asked by the Georgian government, who had actually had an American group there trying to improve productivity. They've asked by the Georgian government to go and set up their system of methodology and learning in Georgia. One of the best meetings I had was actually with the CREA group, and the guy on the left, Ricky Negri, who I started telling you about, he was so passionate about the organisation. I said, "What's your vision for this organisation? Where do you want it to end up?" And he said, "I want it to win the Nobel Prize." And I thought, there's nothing like setting your sights high, is there? But good on him, he was so passionate about his group. One of the other days that was a real highlight of my studies was the dairy discussion groups in Ireland, and I know that dairy discussion groups have been around a long time, or discussion groups have been very well utilised in the dairy industry. But on this day, we had Jimmy's farm on the left-hand side. He just bought another 40 hectares, and this group had been going for 20 years. So all of his information was prepared, benchmarked, all of his financials, all of his production, and then the group actually then looked at his business, and he would actually bought another 40 hectares, so he had to work out how he was going to pay for it, or we could get productivity gains in his system. And it was a fairly rigorous drilling of Jimmy, and with some great recommendations coming forward to the point of actually you sell your machinery, you're not doing enough pasture measurements, you've got the wrong genetics, change in genetics, you're going backwards. So it was pretty severe the way that they were actually looking and giving judgments. And I think the benefit of that is sometimes we don't see the obvious things in front of us, and it needs someone else to come and have a look at our business from the outside to see where those weaknesses are. So very quickly, this was actually a survey of dairy discussion group members, and you can see there the top reasons for wanting to join? What were the motivators? Want to learn from others, access the latest information and advice, the social aspect. The one that isn't there is there's a thing called the dairy efficiency payment. So if you're actually a member of a dairy discussion group, you get a payment from the government. That was one of the lowest motivators for being there. But if we look then at the economic benefits, to see how well this peer learning and benchmarking was going and how successful it was, the best way to look at that is actually the net margin per hectare. And you can see there that non-members were about $1,050 a hectare, and then we go up another 44% to the established members. So you can see that that adoption of new ideas, that sharing of ideas and benchmarking was leading to some real efficiency gains. So a little more about benchmarking, and my apologies for all the Victorians here. I have to use this photo later. About the only one I could find was a West Coast eagle soaring above a hawk. But it'll become relevant in a minute. So the size and the integrity of the database is very, very important. The larger the database, the more you can actually utilise that data and the greater relevancy it has. Also, the integrity of that database, the way it's collected using a common platform, is most important. But the way that I like to look at it is it probably ground truth performance. Like you could be Hawthorn and you go out there, you're at training, you know, you're looking great. You can handball, you can kick, you can mark, you can run, you're looking absolutely brilliant. And it's not until such time you get out onto the oval you actually assess how well you are actually going. Maybe there is areas that you weren't performing and it highlights those areas of strength and weakness. So that's what I see. And then from there you can actually investigate further and see what. So it's the interpretation of those benchmarks that becomes critical to then interpret where the weaknesses or strengths are in your business and make the changes. The other thing that I see about that is you actually have ownership of the changes within your business because you've actually had to come to the conclusion of what they are. Another group that I went and saw was the Iowa Farm Business Association, and it was a very good example of benchmarking on a large scale. Every farm consultant in Iowa was using exactly the same platform for their data collection, and then you could actually be benchmarked in your local region. So probably the best thing about that was the size of the database and the common platform on which they collected it. So very quickly, where do I see in the future? I see an increased role for grower groups as we see state governments pulling out of extension. I think that the grower groups will play a very big role because they're a great conduit for extension, they're very local, they're very relevant, and also if they've got linkages to researchers, it keeps that research well ground truthed. Secondly, business discussion groups. Since I've actually returned from Nuffield, we've been lucky enough to set up 2 business discussion groups in the Esperance area, and this was last Friday at the second one of those meetings. I was the first cab off the rank and we're sharing all of our financials, everything, all of your financials, all your productivity data, all your aspirations. I akin it to getting undressed in public, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. Actually it was great. The day was good. The other thing I'd love to see is also consolidated benchmarking on a regional level, and my aspect here is that I use a consultant in Western Australia, and they cover all of Western Australia. So I'm benchmarked against the medium rainfall zone, which runs from Geraldton in the very north of the state, or the north of our agricultural area, down to Esperance where I am in the southeast, which is about 1,100 kilometres. So any of those benchmarks are probably rather irrelevant. So what I'd love to see us end up with is a system whereby we have data collection shared by all consultants and we're benchmarked against all farmers in my agricultural zone rather than over the whole of the state. So lastly, I'll just leave you with this slide you've actually seen once today already. But I think this also is very relevant about practice change and how we try and keep ahead of the curve. So thank you very much, and thank you to Nuffield and GRDC.